The tranquility of a Seattle dawn shatters at 5:04 a.m. 3 high-altitude EMP blasts obliterate satellites and plunge the West Coast into darkness. Phones die, smart cars halt, and the real terror begins. Dozens of cruise missiles rip across Puget Sound, striking airfields, data centers, and power grids. From the Pacific, drone swarms overwhelm radars, hunting targets with chilling precision. As the city reels, Russian commandos, disguised as dock workers, launch coordinated assaults on ports and infrastructure. Behind them, a Chinese amphibious force disgorges troops and armor from retrofitted cargo vessels. Above, surveillance balloons hang like ominous moons, feeding real-time imagery to the enemy. The unthinkable has become real. The Homeland has been hit. Hours earlier, at 4:30 a.m. Eastern, NORAD detected faint blips over the Pacific. U.S. infrared satellites confirmed it. Multiple missile launches. Within seconds, computers identified them as a wave of cruise and short-range ballistic missiles, likely from enemy submarines and disguised cargo vessels. This wasn't just a barrage, it was the opening move of a full-scale, coordinated Russo-Chinese invasion of Seattle. Their goal, a rapid bite and hold to establish a foothold, push the U.S. Navy out of the Pacific, and secure a temporary forward base. NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain bunker erupted. This wasn't a drill. Washington, D.C. lit up with urgent calls. The president, awakened and rushed to a secure bunker, received the staggering news. Just 7 minutes later, at 4:37 a.m. Eastern, Air Force and Air National Guard units scrambled. 16 air bases launched fighters under Operation Noble Eagle, the post-9/11 Homeland Air Defense mission. F-16 soared from Fort Worth. F-15 Eagles, F-22 Raptors, and Navy F-A-18s were airborne within minutes, intercepting incoming missiles and identifying threats. NORAD and the FAA issued a national ground stop on all civilian flights, clearing the skies for what promised to be a prolonged air war. By 4:45 a.m. Eastern, the first wave of missiles hit, or were shot down. Aegis destroyers engaged with SM-3 interceptors, and a Patriot battery exploded a cruise missile over Tampa Bay. But the West Coast assault was brutal. Early warning radars were struck in Northern California, and Joint Base Lewis McChord suffered heavy hits, losing airstrip capacity. Seattle's port was rocked by 3 precision strikes, and a massive explosion ruptured the I-5 corridor, collapsing an overpass. Drone swarms descended on Seattle's tech district and emergency centers. Around 30 missiles hit U.S. soil, causing significant damage. An oil refinery burned, radars were temporarily blinded, and communications strained. But the strategic surprise failed. Key American assets remained. Day 0, the defense rises. By 5:30 a.m. Eastern, U.S. Northern Command took charge, raising DEFCON levels to DEFCON 1, an unprecedented alert. Combat air patrols orbited critical locations, D.C., New York, Silicon Valley, and nuclear missile fields. All eyes turned to the Pacific Northwest, where the 7th Infantry Division, 1st Course HQ, and Air Force units at Joint Base Lewis McChord, along with a few Army Special Forces teams, were all that stood between the enemy and the rest of the nation. Reports confirmed the combined Chinese-Russian force had landed at Elliott Bay in Seattle. Amphibious armor rolling off converted cargo vessels under drone and missile cover. Russian Spetsnaz, already pre-positioned, sabotaged bridges and ports. A Chinese carrier task force pushed into the eastern Pacific. Their strategy was clear: seize a key urban center, deny U.S. access to the Pacific, and force a negotiated endgame before the full weight of American power could arrive. Coast Guard cutters and naval littoral combat ships surged to defensive positions. The 82nd Airborne and 101st Airborne were placed on 4-hour standby. The president addressed a stunned nation from a secure location. #Attack in America and #World War II trended instantly. TikTok filled with footage of F-22 screaming over Seattle and fires raging at the port before cell towers went dark. As daylight spread, military intelligence pieced together the full picture. This was a coordinated, multi-domain trans-Pacific operation aimed at toppling American naval superiority and establishing temporary occupation. Forces had launched from submarines, converted cargo ships, and mid-range bombers. Even a diversionary attack by North Koreans across the DMZ was underway. In the days prior, massive enemy exercises in the South China Sea and Arctic had pulled U.S. carrier groups away. while cyberattacks crippled early warning networks and communications. This new axis of upheaval had bet everything on a rapid seizure of the Pacific. Despite the unprecedented assault, U.S. resilience held. Continuity of government protocols activated, secure networks rerouted traffic, critical command infrastructure deep within Cheyenne Mountain and Raven Rock remained intact. This would come back to haunt the invaders. Days 1 and 2. Fortifying the homeland. By the afternoon of Day 0, the Pentagon understood the larger game. Seattle was seized, and naval movements suggested California or Alaska could be next. Navy responded. The Second Fleet reinforced the Atlantic coast. On the Pacific, the 3rd and 7th Fleets combined for Operation Back Tie, aiming to eject enemy forces and prevent further landings. F-35s repositioned to Oregon, PA Poseidon swept for submarines, and B-52s and B-1 South prepared for standoff strikes on suspected command vessels. On the coast, active-duty Army and Marine units rushed north to establish a perimeter around Seattle, while National Guard units in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho reinforced and evacuated civilians. By the end of the first 24 hours, the battle for Seattle raged, but the United States was not broken. The homeland had taken a hit, but not the kill shot. Day 1 saw America shift into an unprecedented defensive posture. Seattle was occupied, the West Coast bleeding, the homeland itself the primary theater. The President invoked the War Powers Act. All 50 states activated their Army and Air National Guard units, swelling defender ranks by nearly 430,000. These citizen soldiers manned sandbag nests, guarded infrastructure, and established checkpoints. Out west, the war was immediate. Troops dug in along the I-5 corridor in Portland. Air defense batteries sprouted around Spokane. Seattle, still burning, was a contested urban zone. Joint Base Lewis McChord, partially controlled by the enemy, saw American units scrambling to hold territory south of Tacoma. Civilian evacuations continued, often under drone fire. The enemy's goal: dig in, disrupt reinforcements, and hold long enough to establish a Pacific lifeline. Federal government seized strategic industries under the Defense Production Act, redirecting fuel, converting civilian airliners for troops, and shifting factories to round-the-clock munitions and drone production. Civilian air travel remained suspended. Congress met via encrypted video. Unrest flared near attack zones, and curfews were declared in 48 West Coast counties. Panic buying emptied shelves. On Day 2, with the initial chaos contained, the military focused on fortifying its remaining beachheads. Priority zones included the Pacific Coast, the Alaska-Aleutian Corridor, and the southwest border, where intel warned of paratroopers slipping through cartel routes. The Olympic Peninsula became a militarized zone, with coastal artillery denying naval access to Puget Sound. Navy SEALs and Marine recon hunted enemy spotters in the San Juan Islands. Marines strung javelin and TOW launchers along cliffs. Helicopter units flew interdiction patrols along Highway 1. Major West Coast cities issued partial evacuation orders. The 10th Mountain Division moved to reinforce the Carolina coast, while the 82nd Airborne remained on 4-hour standby, post for Seattle. By the end of Day 2, over 250,000 active-duty troops, supported by hundreds of tanks, arrayed themselves along U.S. coasts. There was no surprise left. Now, it was war. Day 3. Blunting the attack, turning the tide. In the pre-dawn gloom of Day 3, the enemy tested a new front. A second amphibious task force attempted a diversionary landing near Vandenberg Space Force Base in California, aiming to split U.S. attention. Fast attack craft and hovercraft skimmed low toward the airfield. But this time, U.S. forces were ready. Avengers and Stinger teams lit up the sky. AC-130 gunships, protected by F-35s, shredded boats and commandos. Army Rangers from the 75th Regiment lay in wait on the dunes. The brutal, intimate fight lasted less than 2 hours. Dozens of enemy operators hit the beach, only to be met by a wall of steel. Survivors, interrogated by Chinese-American students, confirmed Seattle was just the beginning. The plan was to fortify it as a long-term liberated zone. U.S. Northern Command reacted swiftly. The 1st Marine Division repositioned to the Los Angeles Basin. The 3rd Infantry Division rolled west from Georgia, its tanks on rail cars and freighters. Air defenses tightened across the west, Patriot and other systems ringed Los Angeles and San Diego. Combat air patrols stacked over the Pacific like a spiraling corkscrew of steel. Carrier groups, USS Carl Vinson, USS Theodore Roosevelt, and USS Abraham Lincoln, fanned out to intercept follow-on waves. Two more carriers headed to Hawaii and Guam to cut off reinforcements. Canada became the first major ally to join the fight, with CF-18s flying patrols out of Vancouver. NATO AWACS arrived from Europe, and Japanese destroyers formed a joint task force with U.S. ships to clear the Central Pacific. Over 500,000 American troops active, Guard, and Reserve were now deployed. Nearly 1,500 fighter jets dominated American skies, while over 100 Navy warships and 60 submarines formed an iron wall. Missile defenses blanketed key regions. The enemy's surprise had failed. The Seattle beachhead held, but it was isolated, bleeding, and crumbling. Reinforcements were cut off. Naval superiority was slipping. Their bite-and-hold strategy was becoming a death trap. Days 4 and 5. Counterpunch and collapse. Having blunted the initial attack and solidified defensive lines, America's strategy pivoted on day 3. It was time to hit back. The Seattle lodgment was isolated, hundreds of miles from reliable reinforcement. At sea, their plan unraveled. The home turf advantage paid dividends. American logistics hummed, feeding the front line faster than the enemy could react. The Russo-Chinese gamble now faced a brutal truth. Time and mass favored the United States. Drawing from the World War II Pacific playbook, the U.S. aimed not just to contain, but to erase the threat and turn the ocean into a graveyard. At dawn on day 4, America unleashed hell. B-2 Spirit bombers from Whiteman Air Force Base decapitated the enemy's floating command structure off the west coast with precision. JDA missiles onto Chinese and Russian command ships. Simultaneously, B-1B Lancer bombers, carrying LASSOM anti-ship missiles, swooped in low and fast from the southern corridor, unleashing dozens of autonomous sea-skimming killers toward enemy destroyers and troop transports. From beneath the waves, Virginia and Los Angeles-class attack subs fired volleys of Tomahawk cruise missiles at naval assets and the enemy's floating pontoon resupply bases. The controversial USS Humboldt had its day in the sun, raining hypervelocity rounds on enemy ships attempting to sneak reinforcements toward Oregon. The enemy was outgunned, outflanked, and out of options. By midday, the enemy Pacific Fleet was in shambles. Infrared feeds showed ships burning, breaking apart, or retreating. An enemy aircraft carrier took multiple hits and listed fatally. Two transport ships carrying armor were vaporized. By nightfall, the organized invasion was effectively dead at sea. Day 5, a reinforced enemy Marine brigade landed at Huntington Beach, south of Los Angeles. Before dawn, landing craft and armored hovercraft churned through the surf, explosions raking the boardwalk. Hundreds of enemy troops spilled onto the sand, overrunning a beachfront hotel, their flag hoisted over its shattered balcony. Drone footage captured foreign armor crawling down Pacific Coast Highway. The 1st Marine Division, just 60 miles south, surged into action with the California National Guard. M1A1 Abrams tanks slammed into the invaders from the north, while Army Stryker brigades closed off escape routes. Apache helicopters rained Hellfire missiles, and AC-130 gunships orbited above. By nightfall, the Huntington incursion was crushed. A few holdouts were swept up by morning. It was the first time a foreign ground force had flown its flag over a major U.S. city since 1814, and it lasted less than a day. Weeks 1-4. Fortress America rises with the homeland secured. The gloves came off on day 7. The Pentagon unleashed the remainder of Operation Back Tie, a full-spectrum offensive to destroy the enemy's ability to ever attempt such a campaign again. Ohio-class submarines fire over 400 Tomahawk missiles at naval bases, radar arrays, and airfields across the enemy coalition's Pacific launch zones. Military ports in the South China Sea, Siberian Far East, and near Vladivostok vanish under white-hot precision fire. D-50 to Stratofortresses conducted long-range bombing missions, releasing not only conventional ordnance, but also leaflet bombs urging enemy civilians to surrender. U.S. Cyber Command went on the offensive, blacking out entire enemy grids, stopping trains, grounding aircraft, and silencing communications. American-backed insurgent groups, within enemy borders came alive. U.S. Special Operations Forces cleaned up remaining threat vectors. The tide of war had fully turned. The Seattle front was isolated, unsustainable. Reinforcements were not coming. Ammunition was running dry. Aerial resupply was impossible. Enemy units began to surrender. Behind the scenes, the U.S. delivered a quiet but unyielding ultimatum: surrender or risk annihilation. The U.S. nuclear arsenal remained untouched but unmistakably ready. By week 2, with the West Coast stabilized and the Seattle invasion contained, the U.S. pivoted to sustained defense, overwhelming industrial mobilization, and methodical dismantling of any remaining threat. The Homeland bore scars, but now it was about initiative. Seattle remained contested but surrounded. Joint Base Lewis McChord was back under U.S. control. Fortress North America became reality. Thousands of troops reinforced Guam, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. The Panama Canal was placed under U.S. military protection. Surveillance assets deployed throughout the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. The Rio Pact activated. Canada reinforced Vancouver and Nova Scotia. Mexico deployed elite counter-cartel troops to secure its northern border. Brazil and Colombia offered basing rights. The Space Force proved its worth. Quick-launch satellites replaced those lost, and GPS, comm satellites were hardened. A new layer of resilience orbited Earth. A mesh of over-the-horizon radar and aerostat blimps stretched from Baja to British Columbia. The Civil Air Patrol and private drone enthusiasts patrolled the skies. America's weekend navy of retirees and fishermen coordinated for low-tech coastal surveillance. It was a total defense, total effort. In week 3, backed by the Defense Production Act, America's industrial might roar. Detroit retooled overnight, producing Strykers, Humvees, and Abrams parts. Boeing shifted to stealth drones. Lockheed ran triple shifts, F-35s rolling out in unprecedented numbers. Shipyards hummed. Damaged cruisers and destroyers were repaired or refitted on the East Coast. Older mothballed ships were reactivated. The Selective Service was quietly reactivated for specialists. Volunteer enlistment skyrocketed. Boot camps overflow. Energy and agriculture remained stable. Americans willingly shifted into war mode. Fuel rationed. Lights dimmed. Victory gardens sprouted. The Pentagon's black budget labs went white-hot. DARPA rolled out micro-drones, AI-powered threat assessment tools, and prototype loitering munitions. Silicon Valley became digital defense contractors, spinning up logistics aids and rewriting battlefield communication systems. The world had seen enough. NATO Article 5 fully activated. UK warships joined US carrier groups. German and French fighters rotated through Iceland and Nova Scotia. Polish troops redeploy. Australia and Japan became strategic linchpins. Global sanctions obliterated the invaders' economic lifelines. Even neutral nations froze trade and expelled diplomats. In enemy capitals, empty shelves and blackouts caused unrest. The war they thought would break America was now breaking them. By the end of week 4, a month into the enemy's ill-advised experiment, American forces were surging outward. Supply lines hummed, allies aligned. The war still had chapters, but the strategic trajectory was no longer in doubt. The United States now dictated the pace. Its enemies were reeling and retreating. The bite and hold invasion of Seattle was supposed to shock the world, and it did, but not as the aggressors imagined. Instead of breaking America's will, it reignited it. Instead of fracturing the alliance system, it unified it. The enemy fleet was shattered, their elite forces overrun. Their attempt to hold U.S. territory lasted 6 days, ending with zip-tied soldiers in the surf. In military parlance, it was a decisive strategic failure.